Today we are starting to do our hard mount of the supercharger, which means that I have everything sorted enough that we can attach the supercharger, hopefully without ever having to take it back off. Well, maybe ever is too strong of a word, but hopefully I can put it on there and have it set to be running. I decided to do that before getting the chassis harness wrapped and completely done, because I want that to be in place before I go and hard mount things. Like I'm going to put basically a post here, a positive terminal post right here, and then the positive lead to the battery will run up along the chassis here to the battery that will be over there. That is a decision I have made recently. I gotta patch a hole there first, but I want to get this stuff squared away first before I go and do that. I don't want to end up having to redo things because I put it in the wrong spot and things aren't long enough, etc., etc. So we'll do something somewhat fun and interesting today. We'll get the supercharger hard mounted, and that means that I have to move this bracket here. I want to install a knock sensor. I purchased a knock sensor that I was previously not running for this purpose, because we have a knock light that I will later be adding to the project. But I want to get that on there because it's tucked underneath the supercharger, and I never want to have to try and get under there, so let's do that. I need to connect a new heater core hose here. I purchased one of those, and then attach this, and then we can go ahead and start trying to do, right here is where the bracketry for the pulley, where this guy here will be, and this is basically the tensioner for the supercharger / alternator pulley. And this will be the first time mounting up this, so we'll see just how crazy that is. Okay, so previously, let me grab my flashlight real quick so you guys can see. This is the bottom half of the intake. This is the factory intake right here. And this is a really bizarre setup. Actually, this is a combination of setups, because this is where the factory heater core hose line goes through. This is where an S14 heater core hose line goes through. This is added onto this intake manifold, but this is previously a hard line that would take the coolant from right here at the thermostat housing and take it back to the heater core. So this basically bypasses the thermostat, so you can get heat before you have the thermostat open, because it's using the loop of warm water from the engine into the heater core. Now, it is primarily here a race car, but I'd like to have the heater core on there, A, for the ability to have some additional cooling, B, for defogging the window. You know, even at events and stuff like that, sometimes you get a little bit of fog on the window. It's nice to have the defroster. So now we're simply going to have a hose going from the back here. Alright, there we go. Now hopefully up to here. Hopefully this will be long enough. That one's too tight as well. Good job, me. Thanks, me. Alright, so that's good. That was my hope, is that this would not interfere with anything. Hopefully it's not going to interfere with the bottom of the supercharger. We'll just have to find out. Alright, so there is that, and that should be enough out of the way. One of the things we are going to have a clearance issue is this oil filter, and one of the reasons I want to get this mounted is so I can see how big of a clearance issue it is and how small of an oil filter I need to find. Because I'm going to have to do a lot of parts catalog searching and just, go into the parts store and looking for different options to get one that just has a little bit smaller of a diameter. So this right here, I hope you can see, this used to be a bracket for the bottom of the lower intake manifold. Unfortunately, this is something we have to lose. In the future, it's something I would like to replicate for the bottom of the intake so that it can have some kind of support. Basically, this was here to keep stress off of the studs and bolts of the intake manifold. There it is. So this right here is a spare block I have that's been sitting around a long time. It's probably trash, but I keep having to pull parts off of it, so I keep it around. And basically what I'm doing right now is taking this knock sensor off that is trash, but it has the jumper harness I need, and I tested this jumper harness and it's actually good. That's a rare thing for these cars. So that might come in handy. This harness will be basically useless to us. I'm just going to chop the end of it off when that time comes. But as long as it's on there and installed, it'll make things a lot easier. And I need this. So this here is a bad knock sensor. This is a problem that plagues stock 240s quite often. And what you can see is the plastic housing around it has given out. That's basically when you know it's done. But this one is actually a brand new one I bought for this engine, and it was on there. However, I ended up bypassing the knock sensor because this guy was bad, and I couldn't get to it, and it was just a nuisance, and we had to get the car going, so we rigged up a resistor into the line and bypassed it. The Mega Squirt system does not have a knock sensor at all, but we will eventually be installing this, which is which I hope isn't shot, but is a light that will flash whenever the engine is detecting knock. Very, very useful. However, it has this wiring harness. Yeah. And that goes right here. That is a machined piece of the block that is just there to accept this. Stock applications, this faces forward, right to there, and just for ease of access, I'm going to leave it there, but it's just going to be hanging there for now. But you'll see in a minute that that is a lot easier to get to now than it will be in the future. So let's do ourselves a test fit. Now I've already test fitted this once, but I just kind of sat it there and I didn't really take note of it interfering anywhere. So now is when I'll really find out. Let's snake it around, and snake it around these. There we go, brake lines. Okay, so it's actually mating up fine, but yes indeed it is. I'm sorry that you guys cannot see this. It is indeed interferencing. There, I'm turning the oil filter back and forth and you can see it's rocking it. So definitely hitting that. It definitely needs to be smaller, but that's the only thing that it is hitting. So that's good. Alright, it's a new day and I've had some time to think about things, and I ended up doing an extension on this heater core hose with a piece that has a bend in it. So it's got a natural little bend right here to shove it over here, because I didn't like that this was rubbing directly on the supercharger right here. So now it nicely tucks kind of under it and should be out of the way. I noticed that this is the speedometer cable and this is the speedometer cable plug. So I need to extend this wire, which won't be too bad. I don't think that's going to hold us up from getting a supercharger mounted today, and that is just what we're going to do. So let me pull the tape off of these. My scaredy tape. Hi valves, how are you? You actually look pretty clean. Number one's open. Yeah, they're surprisingly clean, to be honest. Okay, on the blower side, I did some more research and asking questions. Actually, you need to come off of there, because all right, this is for a supercharger. Is basically your wastegate. It modulates how much pressure the supercharger can make, with it running to vent, basically without a vacuum source on this. This will run 11 to 13 psi, depending on the compression of the engine and stuff like that. It'll probably be a little different than what he was running. I think his was right around 11. This right here will just be the vacuum source for the brake booster. And if we flip this guy over, you can see it's just right there. So it's in the open cavity. Then we have this, which is just a teed fitting. One side of this will go to the ECU, where the map sensor is. And then this is for the boost gauge. This is for air intake temperature. This is for, I don't know, I gotta figure that one out. I'm pretty sure it's for one of the other sensors, but I can't remember which. It's definitely been cut, so wherever this line went, it went somewhere that traveled some distance. So this is the intake side of where it meets right up to the head. And you can see the ports here. I think I may have talked about this before. These ports are blocked off. These would previously be for the PCV system. And then these ports in there are blocked off as well. And those would have been for the, it's basically a choke on the intake where these plates would close, and somehow or another it created more low-end torque. According to Nissan, they got rid of it on the S14, so odds are it didn't actually do anything. But that's all been blocked off. But I need to get this gasket off of there, and while we're looking at this gasket and talking about it, I had the idea to run a thermal insulating gasket right here. And what those are is basically a gasket that, instead of made out of this paper material like most intake gaskets are made out of, it's made out of plastic, made out of ABS. And the reason for that is that it would separate this piece of aluminum from the aluminum of the head over there, and basically block the heat transfer between the two. Because the hotter the intake manifold is, in theory, the hotter the, I guess I'm going to need a knife, the hotter the intake air temperatures are going to be. And you want those to be as cool as possible on an NA engine. You really want those to be as low as possible on a boosted engine that is non-intercooled. That's the important thing to remember here. This is directly compressing the air, shoving it in the engine, and that creates heated air. So my idea was to put one of those on there just to try and help. You know, every little bit counts. And then I got to thinking about it. Not only are those plastic, they are also, here, let me get a blade. Here in Cone's Garage, we use only the finest safe tools. But, as I was saying, not only is it plastic, it is also thicker than a stock. I need to make sure not to do that. Drop these down in the intake. That'd be no good. So let's rotate this down. There, that'll be better. Lighting might not be great, but it's not the most exciting thing to watch. But it is thicker. It's like, it's maybe a few millimeters thicker. It's not a huge difference, but what I was worried about is pushing this out pushes that out, and that sits really close to the strut tower, so I didn't want to create a spatial issue there. If in the future, if we're really trying to deal with those issues, that's something we can turn to. Alright, that should do it. And I had another thought while I was doing this. This right here is the main coolant passage into the head. And one of the main reasons I don't think that that insulating gasket does a whole heck of a lot is because that hot coolant that's running right here by where the engine is getting its hottest temperature sensing runs in the intake manifold. So how cool are you ever going to get this piece of aluminum if your coolant is constantly riding through it? Probably not very cool. So there's another reason that I didn't get too ecstatic about using that insulating gasket. So in here we have a new paper gasket, and it's just, let's just make sure. Yeah, just the same as I've always run. So let's go ahead and mount this guy block side. Just like so. And then the only thing I really have to do is make sure that when I put the initial bolts in, to give it a little wiggle so that it doesn't catch the edge of it, and then it lines up pretty nicely. I've done a whole heck of a lot of these because it's a pretty common failure point. Alright. Picked it up here, but I'm not quite ready because I want to take the oil filter off so that it mounts. You can actually see the dents on the oil filter. We gotta talk about that too. But let's get that off of there for now. Hopefully there's not a whole heck of a lot of oil in it. Nope. And good thing because I dropped it. Let's see. Anything else I'm forgetting? Yes, I am. I want to put this down here. Just kind of like that, just sitting there. Come on, just take a rest. And we gotta hook up this. This is gonna be the brake booster line. And that would have been a bear to get to after the fact. Do I want to run it with the hose clamp facing down so that if I do ever have to get to it, I can? Let's do that. All right, so let's tip this bad boy up. And seems pretty good. Let's run some bolts into her. All right, so here's my fancy dancy little bolt guide, which is very helpful. Even though this is still probably going to be a pain, there's actually a lot less in here than there used to be. You know, we replaced a whole lower intake with something that is huge, but it's actually further out of the way than the stock intake. It's pretty interesting. There we go. So you remember what I said about the bracket that was on the bottom of the lower intake and how it held up all this to keep pressure off of there? That was a pretty good example, is that I actually had to put some upward pressure on this to get the bolts to line up, because this thing is really heavy. Like, I can't explain to you how the stock intake's pretty heavy, but with this on there, it's a lot heavier, and all that pressure is riding right here. It was never a problem for him, but in the future, I would definitely like to run something, some kind of bracket somewhere to connect this to the bottom of the engine, somewhere in there, just to keep some of the stress off of this. I mean, it's going to put stress on all of these, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I'm not going to go too crazy here. I just want to snug down a couple of these in some kind of a sensible fashion so that it doesn't get warped, even though that's not usually an issue. More accessible, yes. Easy, no. So not very tight, just enough to get it drawn up to the head so that we have a good idea as to where this guy's going to sit. Okay, that should be good. Pretty much attached. There we go, there's a first. It's actually attached. Alrighty, so now I want to see how this belt situation ends up. I remember there's a little bit of a jog between the alternator and the supercharger. It only uses the front 3 ribs of the supercharger, but there's still a little bit of a jog in the belt, so you know, it just kind of pushes back a little bit, and that's what that pulley thing is for. First, I need to get this power steering belt off of here. Tappa tappa. There we go. Ooh, you've been on there a little while, haven't you? Good belt though. Good job past me. Alternator belt no more. Oh, that was a nice belt too. Alright, these 2 bolts come out. It's gonna be this one, yeah, and this one that you can't see. Alright, I assume the plate goes on like so. We'll see. Oh, you need to come off. You are no more. Didn't really intend to throw it, but it got thrown. Alright, so this, I remember he said something in here. Alright, let me take these out. That's top, that's bottom. Interesting. Very interesting. This is where this mounts. There's supposed to be a piece of metal that is a spacer between here and the block. Fairly certain I used it on Brent's car, so I had to make a new one of those. And also the front of the alternator needs to be shaved down to clear this. And basically what you can see here is that the belt will loop around the alternator pulley and around here and around the supercharger pulley. It's a pretty simple little setup, just needs to clear everything. And I am slightly concerned that he was using a different alternator than me, because a lot of that looks like it needs to be taken off as of right now. I will definitely be consulting him as far as what he had to do there and what it looks like. So we'll have to figure that out for next time. But one good bit of news is the oil filter seems to clear just fine now that it's actually mounted. And I actually found one that had a little smaller diameter, so for the time being it might be just fine to run that. However, there is an adapter that will relocate that filter, which is something I'd really like to do, and that gives you the benefit of being able to run a oil pressure gauge, a mechanical oil pressure gauge, and that is something I very much so want to run, so I may end up doing that anyway. But in the meantime, I have a list of stuff I need to acquire, including a post for this. I need to get some wrap for the wires and wrap them up nice and neatly. I need to figure out what the heck I'm going to do with this box. There's not a whole heck of a lot I can do with it, but I'd like to do something that's a little bit less gross. And then obviously get some positive cable to go over there, get all that figured out. And then get a hold of Grant, see what's going on with this. You can see that the alternator lines up perfectly with this. I'm starting to almost wonder, no, that looks like it's, yeah, it'll match the first 3 teeth pretty well, just by eye. Yeah, I guess we just gotta shave a lot of this off, which that'll be fun, huh? Alright, that's where we stand for today. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.